You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to the series. We're looking at every Neo Geo game in order of catalog number, and today we're looking at NGH-020, Ghost Pilots, released in 1991 by SNK. Ghost Pilots is SNK's first and only military-themed shooter on the Neo Geo, but the company does have a history of vertical-scrolling military shooters in arcades running on other hardware. Let's begin by taking a brief trip through SNK history. SNK was founded in 1978. The first shooters they released were single-screen games like Ozma Wars and Zarzan. Then in 1981 came their hit side-scrolling shooter Vanguard, while 1984's Vanguard 2 featured a top-down view and was free roaming, similar to the first Thunder Force game and half the stages in Thunder Force 2. SNK's first true vertical scrolling shooter was Alpha Mission, aka ASO, released in 1985. We went more in depth with this game back in the Alpha Mission 2 episode. But then came Bermuda Triangle in 1987. Now we're getting closer. This is less space shooter style and a little closer to Earth. We've got a futuristic time travel theme here, but we're one step closer to that true military vertical shooter like Ghost Pilots. Bermuda Triangle used a rotational loop lever style joystick, similar to Ikari Warriors. I'm not really sure the nature of your craft in this game, but wow, look at the size of that hitbox. At least you get a lot of firepower. Also in 1987 we have World Wars. They made everything smaller, and you have a pea shooter in this one. This one also has ground targets, so you have a secondary bomb weapon but no crosshair. Then in 1988, we get Koku Kihei Monogatari, which translates to The Legend of Air Cavalry, released as Chopper 1 in the West. In this one, you pilot a helicopter. The graphics show some improvement here, but your status indicators take up a large portion of the screen. This game is also two-player alternating, so there's no co-op here. SNK also released Sky Soldiers in 1988 and Sky Adventure in 1989, but these games were developed by Alpha Denshi, later known as ADK. The time travel aspect of Sky Soldiers conjures time soldiers, but otherwise the look and play is mostly that of a military-style shooter. So SNK is no stranger to military-themed games. They've also released the Ikari Warriors series, Guerrilla War, POW, and TNK-3, aka Tank, which Iron Tank for the NES is based on, but none of those games are shmups. It's noteworthy though that all of those non-shmups just mentioned were generally bigger hits and were ported to other consoles, while the traditional shooters were not. Perhaps it's an indication of SNK's lack of success with military-themed shooters going into Ghost Pilots. Examples of some early classics in the genre that were not made by SNK include Raiden, which, although not historical, looks the part, the Tiger Heli and Twin Cobra games, Sky Shark, and Capcom's 1942. At the start of the 90s, overhead view shooters were losing popularity in arcades as beat-em-ups, fighting games, and even puzzle games gained popularity. Genre stalwart Toaplan continued releasing shooters, but was shifting focus to release an increasing number of games in other genres, like 1990's Snow Brothers. Perhaps the best vertical shooters were being made for the Genesis and TurboGrafx by Compile and Hudson, who gave players a variety of screen-filling weapon choices to help console gamers compete with games on more powerful arcade hardware. And with the growing importance of console games, there was an increased focus on horizontal shooters, which were a better fit for home TVs. The vertical shooter genre would later get re-energized in the mid-90s as several new studios like Saikyo, Cave, Rising, and Takumi opened shop. So why are we talking about all these other games? Because from the graphics to the gameplay to the sound, Ghost Pilots is a classic example of the military-themed vertically scrolling shooter, and it's not SNK's first stab at the genre. There's a certain aesthetic and sound to Ghost Pilots that might unfortunately be an acquired taste, but none of that would matter if the game played well. In 1991, Ghost Pilots feels several steps backward from 1990's Raiden, and it lacks the polish and personality of Aero Fighters, which would come out in 1992. Ghost Pilots was directed by the legendary Takashi Nishiyama of Street Fighter I and Fatal Fury fame. Like most SNK games, it was produced by Eikichi Kawasaki, with music by Masahiko Hataya, who goes by the pseudonym Papaya, known for soundtracks in the Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Samurai Showdown, and KOF series. It's World War II, and you take control of your fighter as Allied pilots Tom Phillips and Charlie Stingley. Overcome the impossible odds, which really are damn near impossible in this game, and become known as the legendary Ghost Pilots. Press A to shoot, and B to use a bomb. As in most arcade shooters, you have to continuously press the A button to fire. There is no rapid fire option. But the rate of fire in Ghost Pilots is even slower than most, so I wouldn't fault you at all for using a turbo controller for this one. Besides the extra bombs, your only power upgrades are these S icons. There is only one type of main weapon in this game, and it's these boring standard Vulcan cannons. You start with a dual shot, and then each S icon you collect adds one more shot, maxing out at 6. These power-ups really help, but good luck. You'll have to hold on to them, because after around the second stage, the S power-ups become few and far between, and going back to the dual shot when you die feels woefully underpowered. Your plane moves like molasses, and unfortunately there's no way to upgrade your speed. Enemies have a tendency to enter the playfield from the bottom of the screen, which feels cheap, and your hitbox is massive. The red enemy planes fly in erratic patterns, which can be difficult to manage compared to all of the other enemies on screen following a predictable path. These red planes are also your source of power-ups, so you don't want to let them get away. The difficulty here is pretty brutal, so you may want to try the easy mode first, if you have the option. Some versions of the home cart seem to basically contain the MVS ROM and don't have a difficulty select in home mode. In easy mode, there is much less enemy fire. If you've got a buddy, this is one shooter you may want to take on in 2-player mode, since the slow player movement makes it necessary to have 2 planes covering all the enemies on screen. In 1-player mode, you're going to have to allow some enemies to enter and exit the playfield unscathed. Ghost Pilots is SNK's first shooter to use a horizontal screen orientation, and that might be one reason for issues with the game. You're too slow to move across the field horizontally, and you don't have the vertical space to avoid the enemies that approach from behind. The bosses make nice use of the screen space though. Your shots only fire straight up, which isn't very fun when vertical space is limited. Competing games made things better, with shots that fired at different angles, homing shots, and trailing multi-body option helpers. If you don't have a Unibios installed, you may want that version of the AES cartridge without the difficulty select, because that one provides unlimited credits, even in home mode, and you're going to need it. The game takes about 70 minutes to complete, and that 70 minutes feels a bit too long. With music tracks being repeated in later stages and the lack of variety to the enemies and backgrounds, it can feel tedious. The game may have been designed to look good for 30 seconds while players decide whether to put in a coin, but the mammoth player planes and lack of variety make it so few people would remain interested for repeated plays. Meanwhile, the length is padded out so people who buy the home cart don't feel ripped off, and maybe to milk a bunch of coins from that one person who felt compelled to complete every new game in their arcade. The first and final stages are each basically 2 stages in one. In the first stage, you fight a boss midway through, the music changes, but you don't get a stage clear break like normal. The stage continues, and you eventually fight a second boss. It's at this point that you finally get a stage break, and here the game splits into 2 branches. You can choose the ground battle route on the left, or the dogfight route on the right. The icon at the top is the final stage, and won't become available until both routes are completed. Each route consists of 5 stages. Regardless of which route you choose, you will end up playing both eventually. Unless you're playing to complete the full game, you're basically choosing which set of stages you want to practice here. Midway through, this select comes up again, but it only serves to mark your progress, since you have no choice the second time. The same goes for this screen again before the final stage, where you again have no choice. So the game is split into 2 branches of 5 stages each, sandwiched between a first and final stage. So that's a total of 12 stages, which feels more like 14 if you consider that the first and last stages are both double stages. Besides choosing your route, after the first stage you also have the opportunity to choose a third type of bomb that wasn't available to you initially. Be careful which bomb you choose here, because unlike most games, you can't change it before every level. Only at these points in the game I mentioned where you see this stage select screen. At least this third type of bomb covers the largest portion of the screen, but it's slow. There is such a huge delay between when you press the B button and when it detonates. What's the point of a bomb if you can't use it in a pinch to get you out of a tight situation? In Ghost Pilots, it's best to just save your bombs for the bosses to defeat them faster. The second type of bomb is cool because it surrounds your plane and you have a bit of time to steer its trajectory before it gets set free. But you'll probably want to just stick with the first bomb since it explodes relatively faster and covers an okay amount of the screen. It's still too slow though. It's so frustrating to use a bomb and then die anyway. There's also a fourth bomb type that is sometimes selectable, but it's pretty similar to the first type. The two players aren't allowed to select the same type of bomb, so you'll have to compromise there. The graphics in Ghost Pilots do nothing to further the bigger, badder image of the Neo Geo. Backgrounds are flat and uneventful, with no multi-layered scrolling. The colors are drab, and other than the way you're playing and some enemies zoom onto the playfield, sprites lack animation. It's nice though how many enemies and bullets can be on screen without any slowdown. The bosses are the best part of the game graphically. The bosses tend to fall into one of two categories, giant tanks or planes. It's hard to imagine the creative process someone went through to design these things. Let's see, I want to put some rotating gun ports in the middle with huge wrecking balls on chains that can shoot out on each side. In case the rotating gun ports get destroyed, we need another gun port that can come out and shoot 3 shots at once. You engineers wanted to work in the big leagues? This is what it takes. I call this creation the Murder Mobile. Damn, does this game take place during WW2 or WW4? So the whole thing should be this giant tank with massive treads. In the front, a flamethrower on each side with 4 cannons that shoot spinning fireballs in the middle. Don't forget to build a hatch to cover the fireball cannons. Spare no expense. In case anyone manages to get past that, after that I want a cluster of gun ports. Following that, I want a set of 3 cannons running up and down a big conveyor belt with space for tanks to drive on the sides. Next, of course, missile launchers. You can never have enough of those. Wait, I'm not done. More spinning fireballs and flame cannons on rails on both sides. In case all of that stuff blows up, I want the ability to shoot every kind of gun from the main cockpit.
Sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
Ghost Pilots has your typical military game soundtrack. It gives off that foreboding war is hell vibe of many military-themed games of the era. The music is extremely forgettable and unremarkable. It's far from Masahiko Hataya's best work, unfortunately. I'm a fan of the drum sample they went with, but unfortunately it's overused. This is the best music track in the game. And even that song doesn't have much going on melodically, but at least it has energy, unlike most of the music. SNK's early Neo Geo soundtracks that we've seen in this series so far have been generally underwhelming, and Ghost Pilots unfortunately does nothing to reverse that trend. The Neo Geo CD version of Ghost Pilots is exactly what you'd expect it to be. Considering the game's age, of course there's no arranged soundtrack. The whole game loads up in about 50 seconds and never loads again. Except for the freeze before each boss to access the music tracks, the CD version is identical to the cartridge version. It doesn't freeze before the stage act break, although you can usually hear the laser lens traveling really far in order to access that stage clear music. Overall, Ghost Pilots on the Neo Geo CD is a very serviceable version of the game. There are people out there who do like Ghost Pilots. If you play for score or try to 1cc this game, there is fun to be had, but you move so slowly and your hitbox is so big. When you die, you lose all of your power-ups, and then there's not much hope of survival after that. It's hard to recommend Ghost Pilots when there are much better games in the genre like 1943 available. There are quite a few decent shooters available for the Neo Geo, but you can definitely skip this one. The bland, forgettable presentation and sluggish, unfair gameplay make Ghost Pilots a rare miss on the Neo Geo. It's for the best that SNK called this genre quits after this one. It's clear that a lot of love and passion went into many of SNK's games. Ghost Pilots feels like people were just punching the clock. The Neo Geo is known for its high proportion of quality games in its library, so fear not folks, it gets better from here. Thank you for watching another one of these Neo Geo retrospectives. In the next episode we'll be looking at NGH-021, Puzzled, aka Joy Joy Kid. Please join me, I'll see you next time.